and welcome to another edition of Wealth Press TV. And make sure that you like us, make sure you follow us, and follow us all over social media. And you want to pay close attention here in coming minutes because I'm joined by my friend and colleague, James West. James, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Jeff. How are you doing?
Doing good, doing good. And I know that space and the investment potential of space, which is happening right now, is near and dear to your heart. And so I thought today we would talk a little bit more about the potential for what you see here. Maybe we can talk about some companies too. So tell us just a little bit about how we got from, space, the Apollo program, shuttle and all that we're all very familiar with, to the point of right now where space is actually an investable sector.
Jeff, this is a quick moving opportunity that has really sort of come about as a result of the convergence of a few seemingly unrelated events. But I want to stress right now that the opportunity inherent in the investment in space for the retail investor at this time is unprecedented. And it's the reason why Wealth Press has tapped my team to come up with a special report and research on what is going on in space. The first event that happened that makes space such a now thing, right now, is the fact that the Artemis Accords, approved earlier this year by President Trump and the cabinet, is the first global accord, first global platform to create a framework by which all sovereign nations are invited to participate financially and politically in the evolution of the ownership and exploitation of space and all that entails. And so the Artemis Accords has now created this pathway for any government to partner with the United States in developing communication systems, launch and reuse infrastructure, different planetary orbital outposts and supply mechanisms, as well as developing vehicles that can be used to travel beyond our solar system. And so the Artemis Accords is the one first shot across the bow that should be the great event that puts you on notice that space has just become a very much in play opportunity right now. The second thing that happened was Elon Musk obviously perfected the use of reusable rockets, bringing the cost per pound of payload delivered to space into such a manageable range that he's in the process of literally deploying tens of thousands of satellites that will together form the equivalent of a mesh network in low Earth orbit over all of the world. And so that's the first time that internet is going to be available all over the world, and communications around the world in orbit are also going to be able to access that system. And so those two things sort of came together to put space in play now.
Just how big can it be? What's the actual opportunity, the size of the market that we're talking about here?
$15 trillion is the number that's being thrown around by Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank. $15 trillion, is the number that is sort of the first stage of investment in this space explosion. And I'd go into more detail now, but in the context of our half-hour program slot here on Wealth Press TV, I don't really have time to go that in depth. But tomorrow I'm doing a live webinar at 12 p.m. Eastern time. And if viewers are interested in the step-by-step, line-by-line reasons and opportunities, and I'm going to talk about a number of companies that, in my opinion, have the potential to explode in value. And these are right now companies. So that's tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern. Today, I can tell you that there are companies that are going to be competing with Elon Musk in the race for space. SpaceX very much at the head of the charge. But unless you know Elon Musk personally, or you have a broker who's connected directly to Elon Musk, the chance of any retail investor getting a participation in any company associated with Elon Musk is slim to none. And so that's why we put together this special report at Wealth Press with Wealth Press's team and my team, is because there are so many other companies peripheral to this whole thing that are not headline newsmakers, that are kind of obscure companies that are either supplying the parts necessary to put the full potential of space into play, or they're going to be direct competitors to Elon Musk's SpaceX and Starlink, which Elon Musk has indicated that SpaceX is going to spin off into an IPO when revenue stabilizes. And he indicated himself that that could take a number of years. So there's just zero chance of playing space for the retail investor. And so if 15 trillion is the first blush of investment cash that's going in from the world's biggest investment banks, but Elon Musk's world is kind of off limits to us retail investors, then how do we get into some of that $15 trillion? How do we participate? That's the focus of our special report and webinar tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern on the Wealth Press Network. And that's why we're looking at this opportunity right now, because it's fast moving.
SpaceX made all this happen to a very large degree. In the background, you've got things like composite materials, carbon fiber materials. You've got things like the technology for with SpaceX. Obviously, we've all seen the video of them launching rockets and the booster stages break off and land back down at these specific pads at the Cape. And to see this big tube come down to land or land on a barge, a couple of 100 miles off of Cape Canaveral, it is fascinating to see. And it's things like gyroscopic technology and the ability to put all that onto tiny chips to allow these things to steer themselves is fascinating. I just wonder if you could sort of expound upon some of that a little bit, the technology pieces that have all come together in the background that a company like SpaceX and other companies are now beginning to to put into their products and their services to make space a reality.
Yeah, well, that's interesting and good point, Jeff. Meanwhile, all these major steps have been happening. The Artemis Accords, the presidential decree about the Space Force, the newest division of the armed forces and armed services to be announced in 70 years. Those are the big headline things that we all see. What we're not really cognizant of on the day-to-day basis, because it's not the stuff of headlines, is the progress being made in semiconductors, in solar power, solar chips, in different wavelength communications protocols, in codecs and decodecs that are basically the processing power to take a signal, package it into a smaller digital footprint, send it out into space and have it decode at the other end. Like all the evolution in these small peripheral technologies that have been going on, those are the secondary aspect of what has happened in 2020 to put the space opportunity in play now, is this incredible evolution. The semiconductors now, the LiDAR, all of these different sort of seemingly unrelated technologies that are actually, they all need to come together at a certain level of sophistication and reliability to work together, because once you go beyond a certain distance in space, you're on your own. You cannot have questions surrounding the reliability and the effectiveness of the equipment upon which your lives depend. And that's, again, one of the secondary opportunities. Sure, Elon Musk and SpaceX and Starlink are going to steal the headlines, and that's fine, because in the meantime, all of these other companies that are supplying all of the hardware that's going up there are quietly making tremendous progress, and you can see it in their financial performance. We're going to list a bunch of the companies who have had transformational contract development in their corporate evolution in our special broadcast, which will be Thursday, October 15th at 12 p.m. Eastern time. And those companies are not household names. Those companies are the ones that have the potential to increase in value by hundreds of percent, in some cases thousands of percent. Not well-known companies that are nonetheless at the cutting edge of the technical evolution inherent in semiconductors, LiDAR, all of these things that are required for space to be accessible.
Yeah, that's what I find most interesting about this, because somebody who's been involved in the markets and investing on my own and recommending stocks as well here, So often all of us in the popular media, let's say, focus on a handful of companies. In this case, of course, everybody mentions SpaceX, and maybe in a distant second, you might mention something like Boeing again when we're talking about headlines for space technology. But the real opportunities, as you say, are in these small companies, and in part that's because nobody knows they're there. And quite often they need somebody like you to tell them where these opportunities are, because your team and you guys have been there sort of tracking down, like, well, this technology or this piece, this component of a spacecraft or what have you is made by this firm and it's going into the spacecraft. Or I'm just making up an example here, but that part I find fascinating, and I think everybody at home needs to pay close attention in this case, because that's how you hear about these small companies that you may not hear mentioned on CNBC for a long time. And of course, by then, and you know this well because of your history as an early adopter and somebody who identifies these disruptive trends years ahead. By the time you hear about it on CNBC or read about it in the Wall Street Journal, your ability to get the 1,000% gainers is severely limited, because it's already well known within the investment community.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's I mean, here's the thing you've got to understand about space, and this is the CEO of the company that actually put the first 4K and 8K cameras on the International Space Station. The CEO of that company, who I actually featured to my subscribers back in 2014 when that camera went live, he said to me, space is very expensive. And his company actually went broke. And one of the things that you'll quickly realize when you start to do the research on companies associated with space is that, for the most part, these are companies that are investing a lot of money with no hope of a return for many years to come. Let's take the example of Iridium. Iridium was one of the first companies in the world to offer satellite-based cellular telephone communications. Ridiculously expensive, super low number of subscribers and uptake. This is back in the 2000s, remember? And so Iridium struggled for years. In fact, their last reported quarter, I think they lost $1.69 per share. So what they've got is a investment backbench that is committed to looking very far into the future. Yes, you're going to lose a lot of money, and it's going to be a long time before you're able to deliver a return to investors. Those are the companies that I like to avoid. And if there is one element of my approach towards identifying companies that are going to deliver a positive experience to investors in the near term, it is the science and more art of pattern recognition. And so what we look for in the financial statements of companies that are quietly building new technologies in the background, we don't want to rush into an Iridium that is going to lose money for decades and have that miserable experience of watching dead money sit there with no hope of a return. We're looking for companies that are going to leap forward in value by exponential amounts based on their financial performance, their ability to monetize their products in the now, in the here and now. That is the major difference between the CNBC companies in the headlines and these lesser known ones in the background. The mainstream media is not interested in lesser known companies that are making money hand over fist. They're interested in the huge stories that are investing billions and trillions of dollars, and they don't care that they're losing money. And they really do a disservice to the individual investor by doing that.
You mentioned Starlink, and I know you have this term Sky-Fi that you've talked about. We haven't said much about it here. Just talk a little bit about Starlink and Sky-Fi and the opportunity. What is it? What is Sky-Fi? And what is this Starlink thing you're talking about? And how does that figure into all this?
Sure. Well, Starlink is a subsidiary of Space Exploration Corporation, better known as SpaceX. Starlink has received approval, FCC approval, to launch over 1 million satellites into space to create a low Earth orbit network of satellites that create a mesh internet service to the entire surface of planet Earth. Not just to planet Earth, but also beyond the surface of the mesh. We're talking 170 miles up here as opposed to 22,000 miles up as the old satellites used to be. And so Starlink is essentially going to transform the entire communication of humanity. Again, like the internet changed everything. Suddenly you could communicate, you could download robust information, you could interact with people in two directions on the internet. It changed everything. It created Amazon, it created Cisco Systems, it created so many billion-dollar unicorn companies. Apple, the most valuable company in the world today, over $2 trillion. Apple got there because of the internet. And just as the internet transformed our world, so Starlink and Sky-Fi are poised to transform our world again by creating so much connectivity that many of the technologies that have been developed and waiting in the wings, and I'm referring here to Internet of Things technologies, they've not been able to be rolled out because they rely on bandwidth which just isn't there. They transmit, they gather, they rely on so much data that before Sky-Fi, these technologies really could not hit a level of saturation in the mass market. I believe it was it you who was telling us in a conversation the other day that the average self-driving car generates 4,000 terabytes of data per day?
Yeah, we had that discussion. That's correct.
Yeah. So there's an example. It's like, well, how do you get 4,000 terabytes to a server and back again if there's bidirectional transactions required? And a transaction meaning that, you know, a bit of data is sent to a server, it's analyzed by an algorithm and sent back as an actionable piece of data to the vehicle in such speed because these vehicles are moving around. I mean, that's just hasn't been possible because the saturation of towers on the planet is insufficient to provide the level of connectivity that all of these Internet of Things devices require, which constitute essentially the next step forward in the evolution of human technology.
So the idea is here what that basically, whether it's a 5G type capability or let's say 6G or 7G or 10G, that essentially SpaceX can just bundle a bunch of these satellites, which I know are very small, into another rocket and just send up a new generation of satellites that have even more capability, which obviously would be a lot faster than spending years trying to refit, you know, old cell phone towers and that sort of thing. Is that the idea?
For 5G, for example, you probably have received some advertising marketing material from AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, whoever your provider is, that is trying to push you into making a purchase of a new, well, Apple's coming out with their first 5K capable phone at some point in the next couple of weeks. AT&T and Verizon have both been cautioned by the FCC against advertising 5G capabilities on their network because despite the presence and availability of a 5G phone, without the bandwidth and connectivity, and most importantly, the speed of transmission that is required for 5G, 5G is really not very useful. It's like, well, it's like, great, if I tell you we can communicate by laser, and you say, well, great, I don't have a laser, well, then what good is it? I can't talk to you, you don't have a laser. It's the same thing with 5G. Without that backbone of infrastructure to provide speed of transmission and volume of bandwidth, 5G is dead. It's dead on arrival. And in fact, with the arrival of Skylink and all of these new technologies, 5G has been made redundant and irrelevant and yesterday's news. So if they're telling you to rush out and buy a 5G phone, save your money, because this new Sky-Fi network is going to enable 6G, 7G, 8G, 10G. It's going to create a speed of evolution in these technologies that really is going to make new things possible, things that we haven't even imagined.
You're not ready yet to talk about specifics on the companies, but can you maybe, sort of just give us some hints or some tease me, if you will, if, on what sort of companies you might be talking about as being on your radar for this?
I'm going to talk about right now one, and the reason I'm going to talk about it is because it's not, you can't buy it right now. It's in fact has just successfully exited bankruptcy. And people think, wow, well, why would I want to invest in a bankrupt company? Well, the people who bought it out of bankruptcy are probably two of the most wealthiest institutional capital pools in the world, one being Barty Global, the other being the government of the United Kingdom. And OneWeb is the company I'm referring to. And OneWeb is in the process of deploying over 400 low Earth orbit satellites for the purpose of broadcasting a Sky-Fi signal. Exactly what Elon Musk is doing. The main difference being they're here first. They've already got their satellites up. They're ready to start broadcasting. The problem was they ran out of money. And so they went into bankruptcy protection. It was just October 2nd, a few weeks ago, or a week ago, just over a week ago, that it was announced that the bankruptcy court had accepted the bid of a joint bid of the UK government and Barty Global, which is one of India's largest private equity firms, to acquire the assets of OneWeb. And now OneWeb is back on track to, put their service, put their network into service. So here's this company that went broke. Now it's got major financial backing by deep pockets with zero chance of them running out. And so suddenly, just days after Elon Musk announced that he's going to allow retail investors to invest in Starlink one day when revenue stabilizes, here we've got this opportunity to invest in an early stage first mover in the whole Wi-Fi low Earth orbit satellite internet service space that is at some point going to be an investable opportunity. And those are the opportunities that you probably haven't heard of. You're probably hearing a lot about SpaceX and Skylink, or rather Starlink, but you're not hearing so much about Barty Global and the UK government and OneWeb. So this is where our research differentiates the opportunities from what everybody knows versus what only a handful of people are following. And that's where money's made.
James, how do you find out about this stuff? And do you have another company you want to toss your way, similar to what you were just mentioning?
Well, Jeff, I do, but I'm going to hold back on that until tomorrow's broadcast at noon Eastern time, because that's really for our subscribers. And that's kind of the value that we provide, is giving them first shot at these opportunities before they skyrocket in value. And so if anybody's interested, they can tune into our show tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern time. And I will be sharing a whole bunch of companies on that show.
Well, to talk a little bit, how do you, like for the company you're mentioning and the narrative behind it, as far as, they went into bankruptcy. Now you've got these large investors that have bought it out of bankruptcy. And by the way, I definitely get what you're saying with that, because when companies go into bankruptcy, sometimes that's just what they need, because it allows them to sort of wipe the slate clean on debts and other things that were holding them back before they can then sort of do the heavy lifting internally to then come back out to the public markets and then have a business that really works. And there's countless numbers of companies that have had to do that in order to really find their way to being the right kind of company that's going to attract investors for years and years. But how do you find out about these sorts of opportunities?
Well, Jeff, I've got a network that I've developed over my entire career. That, I'm not trying to brag per se, but heads of state, former presidents, institutional investors who are, measure their their profit in the billions of dollars, not just their net worth. Um, and so it's through this lifelong network and through a lifetime of being recognized as an investor who specializes in longer term pattern recognition. It's easy to employ the techniques of the technical trader who trades in the short term and basically employs pattern recognition to determine when major moves are about to happen in stocks in the immediate term. It's a much different game when it comes to analyzing the long-term fundamental aspects of companies that are representative of disruptive shift in an industry that is going to transform that industry and transform the way we live, work, and recreate. Those are two different skill sets. And so most of the institutional traders and investors that I associate with are very adept and have staff, floors of them, who are perfectly equipped to interpret technical indicators and make those moves in the shorter term. But to transform, to create sovereign level generational wealth transformation, you need to get in front of the trends that are fundamental in nature, that are disruptive to the industry they're coming into, and that are transformational in that they are going to change the way we do things. They're going to change our lives at their most essential. And those transformations, those disruptors are the focus of the disruptor product that we're going to talk about tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern.
For as somebody who has really good vision for the future, and that's what it takes for this sort of thing. You have to be able to identify an early trend and then see where it can go. I mean, I can remember the days when I would talk to friends about Amazon, and you can buy more than just books and videos there now. Obviously, I'm talking about a long time ago, but people would say to me like, "Oh, but man, it means you got to put your credit card on the internet." I don't want that. And of course, we don't think for even a brief second we can't function without our credit card numbers embedded, on our data that we order stuff from all the time. So you have to kind of see where it is now and where it's going to be a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. And I'm just wondering if you can sort of tell us, if we were having this conversation, let's say 10 years from now about space, what is the space industry going to look like if everything goes the way you think it's going to go?
Well, Jeff, I mean, to suggest that we will be traveling to other worlds and other galaxies, to suggest that we will actually have solved the issues of mortality and disease, to tell you that we will be able to generate cheap energy on a limitless basis that's available to everybody. If I told you that, you might have a hard time believing me because it's still a ways off. Though I would encourage you to consider that with the access to space's vast resources, to space's limitless energy, that is the world we are striving toward, and that is the world that we are going to achieve, I believe, in our lifetimes.
Absolutely. James, I guess that's a good place to sort of wrap things up. I think we're coming up on our time here, but I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time again to sit down. Every time we chat, and we've been chatting a number of times in past weeks, every time we chat though, I learn something more. And I've swum a little bit in some of these waters here, so I just find it fascinating to talk to you. It's exciting. It really is exciting. So James, thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming on to Wealth Press TV today.
Hey, Jeff, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate your time.
And for all of us here at Wealth Press, talking to all of you at home, thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you again.